Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, I had a voice for radio. So today, I thought with the World Championships coming up, and they do start next Friday, the 18th, I thought it would be fun to look back at some of the World Championship winning decks from the past, the very best deck in that particular year. And we are starting off going back to 2011, when David Cohen won the World Championships with Magnezone and Reshiram, Twin Ball, as he called it. Now, the two main cards in this deck were Emboar and Magnezone. Emboar really was just for the ability Inferno Fandango, which, not unlike the Blastoise we've all been using recently and the Magnezone from Breakthrough, allows you to attach as many energy as you like per turn. In this case, it was fire energy. You then had Magnezone or Magnezone Prime from Triumphant that had two good things about it. Firstly, it allowed you to put as many energy cards attached to your Pokemon as you like in the Lost Zone, and you did 50 damage for every energy put in this way, and I'm hoping by now you already see the combo. You attach the energy with Emboar, and then you put it in the Lost Zone with Magnezone to do huge KOs. For those that haven't been playing all that long, the Lost Zone doesn't really get used anymore, but it's essentially like a second discard pile. But as the name might suggest, you cannot get your cards back. They are gone forever. So there's no discard it and get it back. They are gone. But Magnezone also had an amazing Poké Power magnetic draw, which was Shaman setup. Draw until you got 6 cards in your hand, except instead of when you bench it, it was whenever you feel like it, or more accurately, once per turn. Unless you had multiple Magnezones out, in which case it was multiple times per turn. Now, there were a couple of other attackers in this deck. Firstly, Reshiram from Black and White, which has been reprinted again and 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 again. And decent attacks here. Outrage does 20 damage plus 10 more for each damage counter on Reshiram. And back then, there weren't a million different cards that could get a one-hit KO like there are nowadays, so you got to use this a little bit. And Blue Flare, 120 damage, discard 2 energy. This was important because as much fun as Magnezone's attack was, it put cards in a Lost Zone, and in some games you wouldn't have enough energy to take 6 prizes before they were all in the Lost Zone, so you'd use Reshiram to take a couple of prizes and Magnezone to really focus on the biggest prizes. But the other attacker we had here was one of these legend cards, and oh my goodness, they were beautiful. Now, the legend cards literally came in 2 halves, and in order to play them you had to have both halves in your hand at the same time, and then you would play both halves down. They would make 1 card on your bench, and they'd give up 2 prizes because they're 2 Pokemon. Now, this was a brilliant card, or pair of cards I suppose. Space Virus Pokebody. If your opponent's Pokemon is knocked out by damage, take an extra prize card. I.e., if you KO something with Rayquaza Deoxys Legend, you take an extra prize. And Ozone Buster did 150 damage, you discarded all fire energy. But because you're playing Magnezone and Rayquaza, you played a mixture of lightning and fire. So you could here have 2 lightning, 2 fire on there, and just discard the 2 fire. But remember, of course, with Emboar running around, you could bench Rayquaza Deoxys Legend, attach 1 lightning, use Inferno Fandango to put 3 fire, and you could drop this as a surprise, doing 150 and taking a whole bunch of prizes. And if we look at some of the Pokemon in this deck, which was a fairly bulky deck, it does enough to KO Magnezone, it does enough to KO Reshiram. This would one-hit KO most things and take 2 prizes in a format where taking 2 prizes was not the norm. Of course, it did have a double weakness to Colourless and Psychic, and it did give up 2 prizes, but even if you're swapping 2 for 2, you're doing it on your terms, so it is quite alright. Now, they're the main attackers. There was another Pokemon in the deck just for setup, and it was Cleffa. Ladies and gentlemen, Cleffa in this particular format, because this was played in 2011, which was Heart Gold, Soul Silver on, Cleffa was everywhere. Cleffa was a baby Pokemon, and there's no hey Nick here, because it literally was a baby Pokemon. Free retreat, 30 HP, but the attack for 0 energy, shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 6 cards, go to sleep. And then the Poké Body ability says that while it's asleep, it doesn't take any damage from attacks. And we literally had a format where it was just, did you wake up? Ideally, you stayed asleep going into your opponent's turn so they couldn't KO you, and then you woke up coming into your turn so that you could then do stuff. Because if you were asleep on your turn, you then couldn't do anything. The baby flips, and all the baby Pokemon did this. The baby flips were frustrating as you like, but it was part of the game back then, ladies and gentlemen. It was part of the game. And this really was David Cohen's deck. You set up with Magnezone, and as a side note here, anyone who wants to play this deck in an old format sense, you get Magnezone first. You don't get Reshiram first. You set up Magnezone first to start drawing more cards, you set up Emboar to start getting energy on the field, and then you pick your attack. If you can, you use Rayquaza Deoxys Legend to take extra prizes. If you can, you use Reshiram to take prizes on smaller Pokemon. And then you bring in Magnezone to take out the really beastly Pokemon that need to be gotten rid of. It was a very fun deck, and I played this deck at a couple of cities and battle roads, think League Challenges and League Cups. After the World Championships, it was an awful lot of fun. As a side note, this was a very new format. The Heart Gold Soul Silver format only came in. We had an emergency rotation at US Nationals, so this was a very new format by the time it got to Worlds. But that's a story for a different video. So we do need to look at a couple other things before we finish this video. We're going to look at the other decks that were big at the time, but first we're going to look at some of the important trainers that were around then that you may or may not be aware of. So Pokemon Collector back then was a ridiculous card that I guarantee if it was printed today would go in pretty much every deck, and it would be one of the most played cards in the format. It was basically Bridget, but the cards went to your hand, not to your bench, which means you can use coming into play abilities like Shaman and Tapu Lele. It was crazy good. Pokemon Communication was also a great card. It just allowed you to swap a Pokemon in your hand for a Pokemon in your deck. But of course, remember that you'd always be playing Pokemon Collector turn 1, pretty much always. So that would mean that you would search for free basics, but then you could use Pokemon Collector to swap it for a non-basic. Rare Candy, because you're playing 2 Stage 2s, I'm assuming you'll know about that by now. Twins was very similar to Teammates, except the wording was a little bit different. Twins is if you're behind on prizes, not if you had a Pokemon KO'd the previous turn. So you could twin several turns in a row, even if your opponent wasn't taking prizes. So Twins was different, but it fulfilled the same role. Again, you've got a kind of slower setup deck here. You'd often go a prize or 2 behind while you were getting going, but then you'd be able to just take big KOs and come back, because you've got high HP and you're doing high damage. The trade-off is that you're a bit slower. That's alright. You use Twins to set up, get your Rare Candy Magnezone, and of course, as soon as you get your Magnezone out, you're just drawing cards and you're doing absolutely fine. Professor Oak's New Theory is another supporter card that a lot of people miss nowadays. It's like ending yourself to 6, but not your opponent. Shuffle your hand into your deck, take 6 cards. In terms of consistency and reliability, there was basically nothing like it. It was amazing. We also had Fisherman and Energy Retrieval to get energy back, but you all know about them. And we had Rescue Energy. Rescue Energy was really quite important, because Rescue Energy, when a Pokemon got knocked out by damage, i.e. not by an ability and not by damage counters and not by poison, you put all the Pokemon back into your hand. So you could recover your Magnezone, etc. here to help you get a new Magnezone the following turn. I mean, it's basically Splash Energy, but for anything. And finally, Junkarm. Now, if you weren't playing when Junkarm was around, you probably don't realise quite how ridiculous this card was. It literally was Dowsing Machine, except it was better than Dowsing Machine, because you could play 4 of them in your deck because it wasn't an ace spec. You just discard 2 cards from your hand and grab any trainer card back. Supporter, item, whatever you want, ladies and gentlemen, you get it back. It was silly. This was a great, powerful deck. It was the most hyped deck going into Worlds, and although it wasn't the most played deck and it wasn't the most successful deck overall, it won Worlds. So, of course, it was the best deck when all was said and done. Some of the other big decks at the time were Reshiram Typhlosion. Get energy back from Typhlosion from the discard and pop it onto Reshiram. But of course, Magnezone Emboar could get big KOs on any of them. Yanmega Magnezone was a similar kind of deck, except you'd use Yanmega to hit for free with its Poker Body and cards like Judge. Good deck, but it just did not have the raw power of Magnezone Emboar, to be perfectly frank. And ZPST, where you would have Zekrom and you would bench Pachirisu using the ability to attach extra lightning energy to it. Then you would use Shaman to move it over to Zekrom and hit big damage early. In the Heart Gold Soul Silver format, it was a very new format. Like I say, it literally came in at US Nationals, so Worlds was a tiny bit of an unknown, but this deck was just powerful like you wouldn't believe it. David Cohen won Worlds with it in 2011. Now, if you'd like to see some other videos about some other decks that won the World Championships with an explanation of the deck, the format, etc., then ladies and gentlemen, stick it down in the comments and let me know which year you'd like to see, if of course you have a preference. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio for some live action, and if you want to support the channel you can do so at patreon.com/PTCGRadio and get some bonus pods, etc. By far the most important thing as always is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross and you've been watching PTCG Radio.